The courtroom was silent except for the rhythmic tapping of my pen against the witness stand. Each sound echoed like a gunshot in the marble chamber where careers come to die. I watched Colonel James Morrison, my former commanding officer, my mentor, the man who once told me I had the finest tactical mind he'd ever seen, avoid my eyes as the prosecutor shuffled through evidence that would end his 40-year military career. He still didn't know I was the one who brought it all down. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I was Captain Sarah Chen, disgraced intelligence officer, stripped of my security clearance, and facing court-martial for allegedly selling classified drone surveillance data to foreign operatives. Today, I sat in that same courtroom watching the man who orchestrated my downfall get what he deserved. But you want to know the real secret? The one that would make every person in this room question everything they thought they knew about loyalty, honor, and the price of truth? I never sold anything to anyone. But I did steal something far more valuable than classified intel. I stole justice itself. My name is Captain Sarah Chen. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the enemy isn't across the battlefield. Sometimes they're sitting right next to you wearing the same uniform, saluting the same flag. It started with a lie so perfectly crafted that even I believed it at first. The red light on my secure terminal blinked like a heartbeat. Steady, insistent, demanding attention. It was 0347 hours and I'd been staring at satellite imagery for the past 6 hours, my eyes burning from the blue glow of classified intelligence reports. Coffee had long since stopped working. I was running on pure determination and the knowledge that somewhere in these pixels was the key to saving American lives. Operation Nightfall was 3 days from launch. 12 of our best special operations soldiers were preparing to infiltrate a terrorist compound in Syria based on intelligence I'd gathered, analyzed, and verified. The weight of their lives sat heavy on my shoulders, a familiar pressure I'd carried through 7 years of military intelligence work. That's when I saw it. A shadow in satellite image 47 Alpha Delta that didn't match the architectural blueprint. A structure that wasn't supposed to be there, positioned exactly where our insertion team would land. My blood ran cold as I cross-referenced the coordinates with our mission parameters. We were walking into a trap. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up communication logs, source reports, anything that could explain this discrepancy. That's when I found the modification timestamp. The original intelligence report had been altered 48 hours ago. Someone had changed the structural layout of the target compound, removing a building that satellite imagery clearly showed was still standing. Someone wanted our team to die. I grabbed my secure phone and called Colonel Morrison's private line. It went straight to voicemail. I tried his office. His aide said he was in meetings until 0800. I tried his emergency contact number, the one reserved for imminent threats to American lives. Nothing. By 0600 I documented everything. Screenshots, timestamps, source verification codes. I'd built an airtight case proving that someone had deliberately falsified critical intelligence. I printed everything in triplicate and sealed it in classified document folders. I walked into Morrison's office at 0801, exhausted but certain I was about to prevent a catastrophe. "Sir," I said, placing the folders on his mahogany desk. "We have a problem with Nightfall. The intelligence has been compromised. Someone altered. Captain Chen." His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. He didn't look at the folders. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he stared out his window at the morning formation of soldiers running PT. "Sit down." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. This wasn't the concerned commander I'd expected. This was something else entirely. "Sir, with respect, we need to abort Nightfall. The intelligence is fine, Captain." He finally turned to face me and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood freeze. It wasn't surprise or concern about the mission. It was the cold, calculating look of a man who'd been caught but wasn't planning to go down quietly. "What's not fine is your mental state." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Sir, I've been watching you, Chen. The long hours, the paranoid double-checking, the conspiracy theories about altered reports." He leaned back in his chair, his voice taking on the tone of concerned authority. "You're experiencing classic symptoms of operational stress. Burnout. It's nothing to be ashamed of. This job breaks the best of us eventually." My mouth fell open. He was gaslighting me. Right here, right now, with 12 lives hanging in the balance. Sir, the timestamps can be misread when you're operating on no sleep and too much caffeine. He stood up, walking around his desk to place a paternal hand on my shoulder. The touch made my skin crawl. Sarah, you're one of my best analysts, but you're seeing patterns that aren't there. I'm ordering you to take 48 hours of mandatory rest. Clear your head. When you come back, we'll talk about transitioning you to a less stressful assignment. Less stressful. He was planning to reassign me. Remove me from the equation entirely. The mission proceeds as planned, he continued, his grip on my shoulder tightening just slightly. That's final. I walked out of his office in a daze, my mind reeling. In the hallway, I passed Major Rodriguez, Morrison's second-in-command. He gave me a look of what seemed like genuine sympathy. Heard you're taking some R&R, he said quietly. Probably for the best. This job, it can mess with your head if you're not careful. They'd already started spreading the narrative. Sarah Chen, the brilliant analyst who finally cracked under pressure. The woman who started seeing enemies in shadows. But here's what they didn't know about me: I don't break. I bend, I adapt, I survive. And when someone tries to gaslight me into ignoring evidence that could get American soldiers killed, I fight back. I spent the next 36 hours planning something I never thought I'd do in my military career. I was going to go around my commanding officer. I was going to commit what the Army would technically classify as insubordination, potentially treason depending on how they chose to frame it. But I was going to save those 12 lives. At 2,200 hours the night before the mission launch, I made a secure call to General Patricia Hayes at the Pentagon. She was Morrison's superior and one of the few people in the chain of command I trusted completely. General Hayes? This is Captain Chen, Fort Bragg Intelligence. I have critical information about Operation Nightfall that requires immediate attention. The pause on the other end of the line stretched longer than it should have. Captain Chen, came her voice, crisp and cold. I understand you're currently on medical leave for stress-related issues. My heart stopped. They'd gotten to her too. Ma'am, that's not. The intelligence has been compromised. I have documentation. Captain, I'm going to stop you right there. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. What you have is a stress-induced paranoid episode. Colonel Morrison has briefed me extensively on your condition. Any further attempts to interfere with authorized operations will result in immediate court-martial proceedings. Are we clear? The line went dead. I sat in my apartment, staring at the classified folders on my coffee table, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The system I'd devoted my career to serving had just told me, in no uncertain terms, that my concerns didn't matter. That I didn't matter. But those 12 soldiers mattered. At 0300 I made a decision that would change everything. If I couldn't stop the mission through official channels, I'd stop it another way. I drove to Fort Bragg, used my access card to enter the intelligence facility, and sent an encrypted message to the mission commander's personal communication device. The message was simple: package compromised. Abort immediately. Source: Angel. Angel was my operational call sign, known only to a few people. The mission commander would recognize it and know the message came from someone with access to classified intelligence. Then I drove home and waited. At 0630 my apartment door exploded inward. Armed FBI agents flooded my living room, weapons drawn, shouting orders. I was face down on my kitchen floor before I fully understood what was happening. Captain Sarah Chen, you're under arrest for espionage, treason and violation of the Espionage Act. As they cuffed me, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure standing in my doorway. Colonel Morrison, wearing civilian clothes, watching my arrest with satisfaction. I tried to help you, Sarah, he called out as they dragged me toward the door. You should have taken the medical discharge when I offered it. That's when I realized the true scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about one mission or one corrupted intelligence report. This was about something much bigger, much more dangerous. And I was the only person who knew the truth. But here's what Morrison didn't know, what none of them knew. I'd spent 7 years learning to read between the lines of classified intelligence. I knew how to spot patterns others missed. I knew how to find connections in places people didn't think to look. And during those 36 hours of medical leave, I hadn't just been planning how to save the mission. I'd been investigating Colonel Morrison. What I found in the depths of classified databases, cross-referenced with financial records I probably shouldn't have had access to, was going to destroy more than just one man's career. It was going to expose a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of military intelligence. But first I had to survive what they were about to do to me. 3 months later. Fort Leavenworth Military Prison, Kansas. The cell was 8 feet by 10 feet with concrete walls that wept moisture in the Kansas humidity. I'd been here for 97 days, held in solitary confinement while they built their case against me. 97 days of gray walls, fluorescent lights that never turned off, and the constant drip of water from a pipe somewhere in the ceiling. They thought isolation would break me. They thought the sensory deprivation would make me pliable, willing to accept whatever plea deal they offered in exchange for a reduced sentence. They were wrong. Solitude had become my ally. In the silence, my mind had never been clearer. I'd spent every waking hour mentally organizing the evidence I'd gathered before my arrest, building and rebuilding my case against Morrison and the network I'd uncovered. The official charges against me were impressive in their scope: conspiracy to commit espionage, transmitting classified information to unauthorized persons, and my personal favorite, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. The prosecution claimed I'd been selling drone surveillance data to Syrian intelligence operatives for the past 18 months. The evidence was compelling. Bank deposits to offshore accounts in my name. Encrypted communications with known foreign agents. Even testimony from fellow soldiers who claimed they'd noticed my suspicious behavior and anti-American sentiments. It was beautiful, really. A masterwork of framing that covered every possible angle. If I hadn't known it was completely fabricated, I might have been impressed by the craftsmanship. My court-appointed defense attorney, Major Williams, was a well-meaning but overwhelmed public defender who clearly believed his client was guilty. During our first meeting, he'd spent most of the time trying to convince me to accept a plea deal for 25 years instead of risking life in prison at trial. "Sarah," he'd said, spreading the prosecution's evidence across the metal table in the consultation room, "they have bank records. They have communications. They have witnesses. The best we can hope for is to show mitigating circumstances." I'd smiled at him then, an expression that had clearly made him uncomfortable. "Major Williams," I'd said, "do you know what I did for 7 years before this?" "Intelligence analysis." "Pattern recognition," I'd corrected. "I find connections other people miss. I spot inconsistencies in data streams. I identify when something doesn't fit the established narrative." He'd looked confused. "Okay, and this entire case is built on patterns that don't exist and data that's been manipulated by someone who understands intelligence work well enough to make it look convincing, but not well enough to make it perfect." That's when I'd started explaining what I'd really discovered about Colonel Morrison and Operation Nightfall. When I'd finished, Major Williams had sat in stunned silence for almost 5 minutes. "Even if what you're saying is true," he'd finally said, "how do we prove it? All your evidence was seized during your arrest. The classified databases you accessed were, well, illegally accessed. None of it would be admissible in court." "Who said anything about court?" I'd replied. "The thing about military prison is that it's still part of the military, which means it's staffed by military personnel who take their oaths seriously. People like Sergeant Martinez, the guard who brought me my meals and had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. People like Lieutenant Thompson, the prison chaplain who'd lost her brother in Syria to an IED. People who might be very interested to know that American soldiers were being sent into traps by their own commanders. Took me 6 weeks to identify the right people. Another month to figure out how to get information to them without triggering the surveillance I knew was monitoring my every move. The solution when it came to me was elegantly simple. Prison libraries have computers with internet access for legal research. Those computers are monitored, but they're also connected to legal databases that contain public records, court filings, and news archives. I started requesting legal materials for my case preparation. Hundreds of pages of documents, case studies, precedent research. My attorney thought I was finally taking my defense seriously. What I was actually doing was conducting an investigation from prison, using publicly available information to build a timeline of Morrison's activities, financial records, and connections to defense contractors. The breakthrough came when I cross-referenced Morrison's travel records with known terrorist attacks in the Middle East. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Every time American forces suffered casualties due to intelligence failures, Morrison had been in contact with specific defense contractors in the days leading up to the incidents. Contractors who made significant profits from increased military spending following terrorist attacks. Morrison wasn't just corrupt. He was a traitor in the truest sense of the word, selling American lives to private military companies that profited from prolonged conflicts. But proving it was going to require something I couldn't do from a prison cell. That's when I remembered Lieutenant Sarah Chen. Kim had been part of the Night Stalkers, the elite helicopter pilots who flew special operations missions. She'd been on the extraction team for Operation Nightfall, the mission I'd tried to abort. 3 months ago, she'd been one of the pilots who'd flown into what should have been a trap but turned out to be an empty compound. The terrorists had been gone, warned off by an anonymous intelligence leak that had saved 12 American lives and prevented an international incident. Kim had always suspected there was more to that story than the official report suggested. And unlike everyone else, she'd thanked me for it during my trial. Getting a message to her was going to require calling in a favor I'd been saving since my arrest. Chaplain Thompson and I had developed what could generously be called a friendship over my months in solitary. She brought me books, listened to my concerns about my case, and provided the spiritual counseling that was her official duty. What she didn't know was that I'd figured out her brother Michael had been killed in the Syria operation that Operation Nightfall was supposed to be a follow-up to. The operation where faulty intelligence had led his unit into an ambush. During our next counseling session, I told her about Morrison, about the pattern of intelligence failures, about the connection to defense contractors profiting from American casualties. And I told her about her brother Michael. When I finished, Chaplain Thompson sat in silence for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "What do you need me to do?" Present day. Federal Courthouse, Washington, D.C. The courtroom was packed. Media, military personnel, congressional staffers. Everyone wanted to witness the conclusion of what the Washington Post had dubbed the biggest military corruption scandal in decades. I sat in the witness box wearing my dress uniform for the first time in 6 months. The charges against me had been dropped 2 weeks ago when Lieutenant Kim came forward with evidence I'd helped her obtain from prison. Evidence that proved Morrison had been feeding intelligence to defense contractors, who then passed it to terrorist networks to ensure continued conflict and military spending. Evidence that showed the Syrian compound in Operation Nightfall had been deliberately left occupied to ensure American casualties. Evidence that proved I'd saved 12 lives by betraying a mission that was designed to fail. The prosecutor was questioning Morrison now, reading from bank records that showed millions of dollars flowing from defense contractors to offshore accounts in his name. "Colonel Morrison, can you explain these financial transactions?" Morrison's defense attorney objected, but the judge overruled. Morrison had to answer. Those accounts were set up for legitimate consulting fees." "Consulting on what, Colonel?" "Strategic analysis. Post-retirement planning." Post-retirement planning that required providing classified intelligence about American troop movements to foreign nationals? Morrison's jaw tightened. For just a moment his eyes found mine across the courtroom. The look he gave me was pure hatred. The look of a man who'd been outplayed by someone he'd underestimated. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights," he said finally. The judge nodded. "Very well. Captain Chen, you may step down." As I walked back to my seat, I passed Morrison's table. He leaned close as I went by, his voice barely a whisper. "You have no idea what you've destroyed," he hissed. "The network you've exposed. There are consequences coming that you can't imagine." 6 months later. Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The knock on my office door came at exactly 1,400 hours. I looked up from the intelligence briefing I was preparing to see General Hayes standing in the doorway. "Captain Chen, do you have a moment?" I stood and saluted. "Of course, ma'am." She entered and closed the door behind her. On my desk she placed a small velvet box. "Your promotion came through," she said. "Major Chen. Congratulations." I opened the box to reveal the oak leaves of a major's rank insignia. The promotion I'd been scheduled to receive before Morrison destroyed my career. "There's something else," General Hayes continued. We're forming a new division. Military Intelligence Integrity Unit. Internal Affairs for Intelligence Operations. We need someone to head it up. Someone who's proven they can spot corruption and isn't afraid to act on it. I looked up from the insignia. Ma'am. The Morrison network went deeper than even you suspected. We've identified 17 officers across 4 branches who were involved in feeding intelligence to defense contractors. There are probably more. We need someone who can find them. Someone who knows how to read the patterns, I said. Someone who knows the cost of ignoring them. I thought about those 12 soldiers from Operation Nightfall, safe now because I'd risked everything to protect them. I thought about Chaplain Thompson's brother Michael, killed in an ambush that could have been prevented. I thought about every American soldier who died because someone in our own ranks had betrayed them for money. I accept, I said. General Hayes smiled. I hoped you would. Your first assignment is already on your desk. After she left, I opened the classified folder she'd indicated. Inside was a preliminary investigation file on a suspicious pattern of intelligence failures in Afghanistan operations. The commanding officer under investigation was Brigadier General James Patterson, Morrison's former mentor. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. It was going to be a long war, rooting out the corruption that had infected our intelligence services. But it was a war worth fighting. And I'd already proven that when it comes to protecting American soldiers, I don't lose. My name is Major Sarah Chen. I spent 3 months in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I exposed a network of traitors who were selling American lives for profit. I saved 12 soldiers from walking into a trap, and I probably prevented a lot more from dying in future operations. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom or the promotion or the new assignment. The real victory was in learning that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is disobey orders. Sometimes protecting your country means going against the very people who claim to represent it. Sometimes the enemy is sitting right next to you wearing the same uniform, saluting the same flag. And sometimes when everyone else has given up on the truth, you have to be willing to fight for it alone. Even if it costs you everything. Especially then. The silence before the storm isn't empty. It's full of choices. And in that silence you discover who you really are. I discovered I'm someone who refuses to let American soldiers die for another person's profit. That's a discovery I can live with. Hey everyone. Thanks for tuning into the Revenge Tempest channel. If you love this story, please hit that subscribe button and join our amazing community. Drop a comment below letting us know where you watched us from. Your support keeps us going.